it sure is nice to come home at the end of a long day and enjoy a podcast. But you know what makes the experience that much better? Relaxing with a few puffs of smoke from my McQueen pipe. At McQueenPipes.com, I was able to find the perfect smoking pipe to suit my nerdy, yet dignified sensibilities. I especially love that each pipe is designed and handcrafted by a true artisan, and that all of their pipes are inspired by fantasy books and movies like The Lord of the Rings. Being a bit of a hobbit myself, my pipe is called the Barrel Rider, but they've also got pipes for wizards, rangers, dragon riders, or even goblins. If pipe tobacco isn't your thing, no worries. McQueen Pipes has got you covered with attachments for vaping or even cannabis. Head on over to McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. Go ahead, treat your nerdy heart to something you'll cherish and enjoy your podcast listening experience in style with a McQueen pipe. That's Mac like mac and cheese and Queen like the band. McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout for a 15% discount on your whole order. Cheers, everyone, and happy podcasting.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin undying.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Don't you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
And you say this is boring man conversation. I think this is interesting.
This is cool. Well, the reason why I said this is, for any of the listeners, I do recommend this channel. Have you heard of the Dull Men's Club? They also have a Dull Women's Club.
No, but I do know about James May's Dull Men. Have you heard about that?
I haven't heard about that one.
Well, you say yours first.
So the Dull Men's Club is this group on Facebook where you're not allowed to post anything particularly interesting, but if you find something boring that is intriguing, you can talk about it. So if you notice that, let's say you live in London and you're like, oh, I noticed that all of the fire hydrants on this side of town look like this and they all look like this on the other side. Why is that? And then, other people who are very interested in like relatively boring information will answer the questions. There's another one where they have a taxonomy for the clips that hold the bag that you get your loaf of bread in. The little plastic clips.
The little tabs.
They make an entire like taxonomy of like the different evolutions of the clips, because there's like, and you'll notice this next time you go to a grocery store, depending on the brand, each one of them is slightly different. And why are they shaped the way that they are? Like all sorts of like weird things. And just people who don't go outside a lot, just like look at these and they classify them. There's an entire website and they'll talk about that on the Dull Men's Club. They'll talk about just plain information, about the way that a sidewalk is constructed, or just stuff that would not be interesting conversation at a loud party, but would be interesting conversation amongst other boring people.
Totally.
And then talk about it. And it's one of my favorite channels. They also have like a Dull Women's Club, which basically talks about the same thing.
Yep.
But I love it, and I've been recommending it to a couple of other people.
So more or less my thing is exactly the same. So if you've ever watched either Top Gear or Grand Tour, have you watched either of those?
Only clips.
Oh man, you should watch.
I know. I've heard Top Gear is incredible.
I mean, I will say that Top Gear, and it was specifically quick history on it, was that Top Gear had technically been on since like I want to say the 70s, and it was very much like an everyman's car reviewing show where like, oh, the new Ford Mondeo is out and here are the creds about the Ford Mondeo. It's rather roomy and you can get quite far on a single tank of gas, like that kind of a thing. And here's the pros and the cons and all that kind of stuff. Then in the early 2000s, I want to say, it might have even been the late 90s. I think it was in the early 2000s. This guy named Jeremy Clarkson, who I know you know who Jeremy Clarkson is, came around and got the job on Top Gear. And he was joined by this other guy named Richard Hammond. And Richard Hammond was a radio DJ who just happened to really love cars. And so they were like, hey, you guys should do this show together. And Jeremy Clarkson, being Jeremy Clarkson, was like, we're going to turn this into a rootin' tootin' good time.
Yeah.
Like, why does anybody care about how the Ford Mondeo operates? I'm going to show you the Lamborghini because you're never going to get to drive it. So let's actually have some fun with Lamborghini.
Yes.
And like that's what he did for Top Gear. And he implemented all these things like star in a reasonably priced car where he would invite celebrities to race around the track in like a crappy Kia or something like that and see who was the fastest. And that was like the whole thing of the show. Long story short of it, Jeremy Clarkson ended up getting fired because he punched a producer.
Didn't he have like a panic attack or something?
No, they were in the middle of, because they did these like challenges, right? You had to get from point A to point B in a certain amount of time or with certain constraints or all this kind of stuff. So they were in the middle of doing this starvation challenge where it was
talked
like
about this at some point.
We did at some point, but basically they were trying to get from point A to point B without eating. And the first person that got there got to eat.
Oh yeah, and he was just like, no one's gonna know. Just let me eat something. I'm losing my mind. And they're like, no, you have to. And he's like,
literally,
dude, if I don't eat, I'm gonna punch you.
He was like, I'm a 65-year-old man. I have to eat. I'm like, this is literally getting to the point where I can't do this. I need to go eat, basically. And the producer like blocked the doorway and was like, Jeremy, no, really, this is we need to make sure. And Jeremy was like, if you don't get out of the way, I'm going to punch you. And the guy was like, Jeremy, you're not going to punch me. And he socked him. And then the BBC fired him. And James May, who joined a year or two after they started the show, he and Richard Hammond both basically said, the three of us work like this.
Yeah,
you can't take it's
the
like
synergy.
Right. There's something about how the three of us work together. It's like three brothers that all love and hate each other at the same time, and it's fun to watch. So they quit in solidarity with Jeremy Clarkson. Fast forward, like not even a year. It was like a few months later. Amazon was like, "Yo, we'll give you a show."
Yeah,
and they did the Grand Tour. Now I can't quite say that the Grand Tour picks up right off where Top Gear leaves, but it's pretty close, right? And it is very much worth your time. Fast forward again, Grand Tour just ended. After like 25 years or whatever it was of these guys all working together, they finally said, we're done and we're going separate ways and doing our own things. So Jeremy Clarkson has been doing this show called Clarkson's Farm. Richard Hammond has this, I can't remember what it's called. He did one called The Great Escapists, and then he also is doing one that's about like fixing up old cars at a shop that he owns. And then James May is doing a show called James May and the Dull Men. And it's basically what you just talked about with the Facebook channel, where he finds these guys. I don't think it has to be guys exclusively, but who, like one of the examples I saw was like a guy that figured out a cool system for how his lawnmower works.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Where it's
just like completely boring stuff where it's like, if I was at a party and I was like, so the thing is, I have this many cubic feet of grass, and if I mow it this direction, people completely tune out. But for like this show, that is the point.
Exactly the point is that like, and he's even said,
I love that stuff,
upon
man.
making the show, he was like, this isn't going to be for everybody. There's going to be a lot of you who are going to be like, this is super boring.
It's like, it's in the name, brother.
But I think it's really interesting, and I think a lot of you will too.
And
that's
I think
sort of
you and I can agree on this. What I find more fascinating than fascinating things are people who are extremely interested in whatever it is they're doing.
Yeah.
If you are passionate about making guitars, for me, I'm not much of like a guitar maker or something like that, but if you talk to me with like such intent about what it is that you're like working on, that gets me excited way more than just like, yeah, I went skydiving and it was cool, and I was sick, jumping out the plane. If you're passionate, that sells me 9 times out of 10.
Completely agree. And I feel like I'm one of those people that just goes, if you don't have that, what are you doing being alive right now?
Yeah.
Like, come on, you got to be excited about the things that you do. If you're not excited about the things you do, what you're missing out. You know?
And it can be anything. It can be anything. But I just love seeing people who are fascinated by things.
Completely agree. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's a negative thing. Kat has said to me many times that my hobby is hobbies, right? Like that's what I do is hobbies kind of a thing. And I can't say that she's wrong. She's totally right.
Yes, that's definitely you.
But I don't know. To me, it's just one of those of like, well, that's the spice of life, man.
Yeah, man.
Like you're trying out new stuff that you're interested in. Like, come on, go for it. Have some fun. See if it sticks. See if you like it.
Exactly.
Like,
we only get one round of life, so like try a couple of different things. It's the same thing with Chelena. Chelena's staging at a couple of bakeries.
Oh, sick.
Yeah. She's been a hairstylist for the last 4 years, and certainly that's like the prudent choice is, being a hairstylist because she's got experience or whatever. And at first I was like, hesitant when Shalane was like, I want to be a baker. I was like, this is not a lot of pay, long hours. And I was like, but wait a minute, we're literally only here once. Just try it. Sure. Even if 6 months later you're like, yeah, that was a lot of work and that was not enough money, you at least got to work in a bakery, which is cool.
Hell yeah, dude. Hell
also, yeah, the one that I hope she gets the one that she just staged at, because they have a thing where you can bring home free pastries for every shift.
Yeah.
And I will expand in size by about 6-fold.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a sucker for pastries and just like not so sweet sweets. And that's all they sell. Ugh, gets me every time.
I mean, come on. If you don't like pastries, I feel like you're a sad human being. Like it's just
I
one
agree.
of those. Dude, you want to know a tragedy? Okay. So my mom she's said this many times. She's a very good cook, but if you ask her, she's like, I'm a baker. That's like what I know I'm really good at is baking, right? I tend to feel the same way, where like I really genuinely love to bake. I've baked a lot of stuff, and I can never make something that I cook versus what I bake that I'm like excited about. When I bake something, I'm like, no, this I know is great.
Yeah.
Cooking, hit and miss. Sometimes I make something good. Most of the time I'm like, it's just okay. Maybe not enough salt.
Cooking's a little bit more fast and loose. Whereas like baking, you follow the formula and you get what you asked for, you know?
And it's weird because I feel like 9 times out of 10 people are way more excited over a baked good than they are what you cook for them.
Exactly.
Right?
If I made you a plate of food, that's something different. But if you get me a chocolate ganache-filled croissant, I'm going to lose my shit every time.
Exactly. Like there's just something about it that's amazing. Now, this is my mom, okay? She was born and raised in Louisiana. Her dad was an avid baker. Her mom was an avid baker. My mom, like, if you ask her, what is your favorite food? Bread is her answer, which is a good answer.
That is a good answer.
It's a very good answer.
Yeah. Not a popular one, but a good answer.
So a couple years back, my brother and his wife and their 4 kids were visiting us out here in Colorado. And we went to Costco, obviously, and grabbed like some croissants. We were going to make some croissant sandwiches with like their chicken salad. And then we were also like, let's grab some Danish, man. Come on, who doesn't like a Danish? So we grabbed some Danish. I kid you not. None of their children had ever tried a croissant or a Danish.
Really?
And I was like, dude, what are you doing to these poor children?
I know.
Like,
bro.
let them experience a croissant.
That's experiencing life, man.
I had the honor of basically being like, you kids have never tried a croissant? Okay, you're going to try a croissant. Like, yeah, here you go, basically. And now to this day, every time they see a croissant, they're like, oh, mom, can we have a croissant? Oh, like, rightfully so, because they're a delight. You know what I mean? And same with Danish. I mean, who doesn't love a Danish?
Yeah.
I mean,
same.
It's the best. So anyway, I was just shocked by that because I was like, man, I get it. You gotta eat healthy and all that kind of stuff.
That's
but like
nuts.
every once in a while, come on.
Yeah, come on. There's a French bakery like 5 minutes away, and I frequent it way too much.
Oh, dude. Now you're in the zone of it.
I am.
You were up north where nothing was around you. You got excited because you found a good banh mi place, and now you're like, oh my god, there's everything.
I told my sister, I was like, I thought I had self-control, and I thought it was like a disciplined person. I thought that was my personality. It was like, I'm disciplined. I don't buy stuff. No, I just didn't have it available to me. And now that it's 5 minutes away, I'm gonna get it every day.
You know? No, I will say you're going to experience though. There's going to be a fall off to it.
Yes,
right?
It's beginning to happen now. I'm beginning to settle down.
It was like when In-N-Out first came to town and opened up 5-10 blocks from my house, whatever it is. You know what I mean? It's around the corner from me. And I was like, I can have In-N-Out anytime I want to. And as a good California boy, that was like my dream. I was like missing it. And so there was definitely like a 2-month period where it was like once, twice a week. I was like, I'm just going to go grab a cheeseburger real quick.
Yep.
And now it's to the point where I'm like, you know, like, I'll get it when I'm in the mood.
It's funny how quickly people just get over stuff like that.
Yeah. And I'm not over In-N-Out. I mean, when the mood strikes me, it's
yes, but it's not the mood striking you every single day.
Exactly. Or even once a week. Not even once a month. I think it's like every 2-3 months I'll be like, let's get some In-N-Out. You know what I mean? I'll grab a burger kind of a thing. But like it has definitely slowed down. So that's nice. I mean, like that's gonna happen.
I'm still
for you
waiting on
around
that with the pastries though. That's the thing too, is whenever I'm trying to like, watch my weight, whatever, fatty foods, not a problem. I can skip the barbecue. I can skip the burgers. I can skip the pizza, whatever. That's fine. But taking away cookies or croissants or baked goods. So if somebody passes a Danish by my face, I'm going to start floating like a Scooby-Doo character, every time.
Oh, I like don't get me wrong, you know, if I'm in the mood or whatever, I can definitely get down on a bag of chips, right? But like my guilt comes from my love of like sweets and cookies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like if you allowed me to, I could demolish a pack of Oreos. You know what I mean? I would feel terrible.
By the way,
but I would do it.
have you had the Post Malone Oreos? The sound.
I know they existed.
I know. And we've had this conversation of like, why is Oreo continuing to try to make Oreos? They already made the perfect cookie. Like, I understand the memes, I understand the jokes. Brendan Lee Mulligan is mostly right about that, but the Post Malone Oreos are to die for.
What?
They're a butterscotch coffee filling on the inside,
okay,
with a shortbread like butter cookie top and then a chocolate bottom.
Okay.
And some people say they're too sweet, and they're wrong. I had probably however many was in a full pack of them like 2 days ago.
Okay.
And they are truly good. I am not one for like branded content where they're like, try the Ariana Grande. No, I don't care. But the Post Malone cookies are fire.
Every once in a while, though, something comes along that I'm like, no, you did something special here. And another example I will give right back to you is, although I'm not some diehard Ben & Jerry's fan, Ben & Jerry's makes some good ice cream, don't get me wrong, but I'm not like, oh, God, have Ben & Jerry's. But if you have not tried Stephen Colbert's Americone Dream, dude,
I'm down.
It's so good.
I love Ben & Jerry's, actually.
So I can't remember like all the stuff that's in it, but it's more or less vanilla ice cream, but it has crushed up bits of waffle cone that are covered in chocolate, and that's weaved throughout the thing.
Good.
So it's sort of like, in my opinion, a better cookie dough, because it's like you actually get texture from it, and then like a smack of chocolate too. And I think there's also like either a chocolate swirl or a caramel swirl in there too. Dude, it is
I dig that.
bonkers good,
I dig that.
man. Like, so good. So I get you. There are certain times where like a celebrity endorsed thing is like, no, that slaps.
Yeah. And apparently the Oreo was Post Malone's idea. It wasn't just like a lot of the times it's just you just slap a name on something in order to sell it. But apparently he was like, what if we did butterscotch in coffee? And he tends to have good taste. Weirdly, we've talked about this where it's like, I feel like I shouldn't like this guy, but I do. He also bought a sword from an incredible swordsmith that I know, David Della Gardelle, who's like, he's an interesting character personally, but his swords are to die for. And he has good taste in a lot of things, and apparently in cookies as well.
Dude, my mom texted me like 6-7 months ago or something and was like, have you heard Post Malone's country album? It's really good. And I was like, words I never thought would come out of my mother's mouth is I'm a Post Malone fan.
It's the same thing with like Kendrick Lamar right now, where I saw a tweet where someone had a photo of Kendrick Lamar when he's turning at the camera and says, say Drake, right at the end. It was during the halftime show where he was.
I only watched some of it.
Okay. You should watch it. And when he did the Not Like Us thing, he turns to the camera and says, hey Drake, I hear you like him young, because the whole thing is about Drake having some really weird relationships with other younger celebrities.
I didn't know that.
And he's like smiling and wearing these bell-bottom jeans and like a Letterman's jacket. And I saw some screenshot from some grandma being like, wow, Kendrick Lamar looks just like the cutest. I love his little bell bottoms. And it's so funny to think about that with like Kendrick Lamar, because he writes like the hardest rap there is right now, and just he's winning Grammy after Grammy. But then some like mom is just texting their son being like, wow, I think she even called him Kenny. I love Kenny's bell bottoms, which I think is just so funny.
I'll be honest with you and say I'm completely out of the loop on it. I know there was some feud that went on between Drake and Kendrick Lamar for a while, but like I think my big thing when the halftime show came on is I was like, look, I'm sure there's going to be a billion other people that are like, this is one of the greatest things I've ever seen ever. But I was like, all of this is foreign to me. Like, I'm not in
because
that
you weren't caught up with everything that was happening.
Not
there
even
was a
that,
lot of
but it's
symbolism.
like even his songs. I was like, I'm just not even familiar with these songs. So like, because it's just not my thing. You know what I mean?
For sure.
And so
for that, and I recommend to you and also the listeners, if you don't feel like you understand Kendrick Lamar or any of his rap, you should check out the podcast Dissect by Cole Kushner.
You've told me about this.
Yeah. He does traditional
like hip hop breakdowns. You said,
yeah, hip hop breakdowns, but from the perspective of somebody who studied classical music,
right? And
Kendrick Lamar is a modern composer above being a rapper, in my opinion.
I've heard this.
So
yeah,
check it out. And also, he looks adorable in his bell bottoms, according to someone's grandma. So,
well, weird enough, we've been talking for like a half hour. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Biographers. This is Office
Fast and
Hours.
Loose, whatever.
We are, and it's also
Welcome.
You saw the title of the episode. You know this is Office Hours. You know what you're getting into here, so I probably don't need to even introduce it a whole lot. But before we continue on here, again, everybody, welcome. And if you want to give us any type of support, you can go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/thebiographers, and that's pretty much all I'm going to say for now. And we can continue on.
Yeah, let's do it.
Do you want to talk about our corrections
Yes,
and things
let's do
throughout
it.
the last episodes or whatever? All right. So let's see what we got here. So, okay. So in episode 1 of Tesla, here's our first one. I said that Einstein's theory of relativity was introduced around 1905, but that was not true. The theory of general relativity was introduced in 1915. I was thinking of, I think it's Henri Poincaré's. It's just a very, very French-sounding name. His theory of dynamics of the electron, which introduced concepts of relativity.
Yes.
So relativity as an idea was introduced as early as 1905, but Einstein's unified theory of general relativity was not published for another 10 years after that.
Yes.
Which I do also just think is an interesting thing, that it's like the genius of Einstein, and obviously he was, but
it has to be founded by something. I think
on the shoulders of giants, as they say.
Exactly.
Everything was built on something else.
So many people just don't understand the beauty of human genius, where they think that they are not contributing in any way because they're not a singular force of invention or a singular force of design. But the thing that actually makes humans good has never been our individualism.
Right.
It's always been a sense of community. Even you think about the preppers or whatnot being like, man, I just wish we were just living off the grid. Man, it'd be really nice to have some roads off grid. Maybe make a grid for it.
Yeah.
What if
Don't worry about me. I got a generator. Yeah, where are you gonna get your gas once it runs out? Shit.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's like you maybe don't like other people in your community, but you do need and want a community to thrive because you don't want to do everything yourself. And it's the same thing goes for creation and invention. And a lot of people will be like, well, actually, he got this idea from so-and-so, so he's a fraud. No, he's a human being.
No, I know. And it's like people, you could say that about Stephen Hawking, right?
Yep.
Where it's like, well, but okay, so much of his theories were built on top of Einstein's. So does that mean he was a fraud? No.
No.
It's just silly. So anyways, I just thought that was an interesting thing.
Yeah.
And a little minor correction there. All right, next up here. This was in episode 3 of Tesla. We talked briefly about the creator of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, but we didn't know his name. You were like, I don't know.
John Eiffel.
John Eiffel, yeah, exactly.
Was that close?
No. The engineer who designed it was named Gustav Eiffel.
Gustav, John.
Oh, same. Yeah, you know. And it was constructed specifically to be the centerpiece of the 1889 World's Fair.
Okay. All right.
There
cool.
you go. So
well, I think the Ferris wheel, I know that the Eiffel Tower is more iconic, but if you said, hey, do you want to hang out at this tower or do you want to hang out at a Ferris wheel that can house 2,000 people and is 250 feet tall? I'm picking the Ferris wheel every time. It spins, brother.
I mean,
America just does it better every time.
Yeah. And I would even say something like, don't get me wrong, the Eiffel Tower is cool looking and everything.
It's
and
iconic.
It's very iconic or whatever. But if somebody said to me, I would say no to both, to be honest, because I don't like heights. But if somebody said, do you want to go to the top of the Eiffel Tower or do you want to go around the London Eye? I think we're going London Eye.
Yep.
That just seems pretty freaking cool, and you just see a little more. Anyway, just saying.
Yes,
I agree. A little minor one there. Okay, next up here, looks like this was again from episode 3 of Tesla. So I speculated that the polygraph machine is in some way connected to Tesla. Now, you said you had some conflicting information, so I'm curious to know what you found.
But say what you got to say.
But from what I found, in short, the answer is no. He really didn't have anything to do with it. The polygraph was developed over time, starting with an 1895 invention by a man named Cesare Lombroso that measured changes in blood pressure and was used for police interrogation. It evolved from there, adding things like measuring breath, and from what I was able to find, again, it was not at all related to Tesla. So what did you find?
Okay, so in that episode, you were saying polyphase, polygraph. Is there a connection there?
Yeah.
The reason why it's called the polygraph test is poly being multiple, graph being multiple graphs. If you look at it, it kind of looks like one of those seismic charts, and they're running multiple graphs.
Yeah.
It's because they have several sensors attached to the test.
Okay.
So it's graphing multiple different sensors.
Okay.
So there is, like you said, a sensor for blood pressure. There is a sensor that senses the conductivity of your skin, meaning as your pores open and dilate and, sweat or whatever comes out, that could be an indication of somebody lying. And then they also, like you said, have a pulmonary test, which tests the electrical conductivity of your chest cavity, because more air being in your chest, from what I understand, means your chest is more insulated. So a lot of these systems use Tesla parts. Once again, the polygraph test, just right from the get-go, this is always the kicker when someone's like, no, it's not Tesla related. If it plugs into a wall outlet, yes, it is.
Okay, well.
So it plugs into a wall outlet, and the polyphase system is how we get the power for the polygraph test. Second, the pulmonary, the lung tester or whatnot, from what I understand, uses those electric brushes, which eventually evolve into the radio tube, to sense the electrical conductivity and like pick up on these signals. That's also a Tesla invention. And then I do want to say the mechanism that flicks the actual ink scribes that go on the polygraph charts, from what I want to say, is a transmit or a receiver that has some Tesla origins. So Tesla in no way built the polygraph test, but if it wasn't for Tesla's contributions, one way or another, the polygraph test would either not have existed or would have existed in a different capacity.
Okay. I hear you. I feel like we're getting into
splitting
that
hairs,
territory of being like, well, then the computer really has a lot to do with Tesla. Where
it does.
Like, okay, no, it doesn't.
Everything has to do with Tesla.
Oh, like, okay, yes and no, right? It's the same thing that we were just talking about with Built on the Shoulders of Giants, where like, we can't say that all of physics moving forward has something to do with Einstein necessarily.
I disagree. I think it does. I think it does because when you make a foundational aspect, such as what Tesla did with polyphase systems, transmitters, and receivers, the things that send out information, the things that send out power, and the thing that's sensitive enough to pick it up, that is the building blocks of electrical science.
We can connect dots. I just
that's
don't
not a dot.
think...
That's a straight up invention, dog. Like, if you told Tesla to build a polygraph machine, he would be like, cool, I have the parts right here. He could build it. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do. I'm just trying to say that in the world of scientific invention, right?
There are some things that are a given. I know what you're saying.
And again, like to say that Tesla was a huge contributing factor to the computer being built. It's like, okay. In the sense of what he contributed to wall outlets and electricity, sure, totally, right? There is connection there, but it's like Alan Turing is pretty widely considered the father of the computer. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So like, that's all I'm trying to say is that it's there's shades of this or whatever, where it's like we can trace origins, but it's hard to say that it was like, oh no, he was this direct contributor.
Yes,
that kind of thing.
The way that I would the final verdict on that is Tesla did not create the polygraph system. However, integral parts of the polygraph system originated or were inspired by Tesla inventions previously in history.
I'll allow it.
So, and I mean, also, you have to think the original parts and pieces for the first polygraph machine couldn't have been too far away from Tesla's inventions, because the first polygraph machine was, I want to say, made in 1920 by a Los Angeles cop.
Okay.
So we're only 20 years out from Tesla's really heyday of making transmitters, receivers, and all that junk. Maybe the guy who made it, assumed that it was a Marconi invention, but if it was, then it's a Tesla one.
Sure.
Right? Because Marconi is just like almost 100% a fraud.
I like the passion on this.
It's so funny because I would roll my eyes when I would get these like occultist, almost like Tesla people with this episode. But now that I have like had time to sit and brew and steep in all the information that I learned from Tesla, I'm like, and this sounds radical, if you were to just randomly believe in a real historical person that you should have a faith in, Tesla wouldn't be the worst one. Like
Sure.
if you were going to saint a person or something like that, or consider him a part of your whatever ideology, Tesla's not a terrible addition to somebody's non-realistic, non-objective faith in I don't know, whatever.
Sure. No, I tend to agree.
So maybe I'm going to become a Tesla occultist and slowly devolve and have my own podcast that is just like
Devoted to the Church of Tesla.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, next up here, this is from episode 4 of Tesla. I had mentioned something about a park in Manhattan, New York, where John D. Rockefeller purchased the land on the opposite side of the Hudson to preserve the view. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do remember.
Okay. So that park, if anybody is curious, is called Fort Tryon. Tryon. And not only did John D. Rockefeller buy the land on the other side of the river, which is in New Jersey, he even built that park.
Oh, cool.
Okay. Now, the park itself is 67 acres. And, I had heard initially, and this was from that show I've told you about, Somebody Feed Phil.
Mm-hmm.
He said that the land across from it was purchased by John D. Rockefeller specifically to preserve the view. But that's not really true. Essentially, what happened was he owned the land and then he donated it to the Palisades Interstate Park Commission for preservation. But that happened years before he then built the park.
Gotcha.
Okay. So it was like he owned the land and was like, this is beautiful land. We should preserve this. So he gives it over to the Land Commission. They have it. And then years later, like 5-10 years later, he was like, we should build more parks. And he built this park called Tryon Park.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it was a happy accident that where he built it was like, hey, also right across from the river, there's this view.
So now you get both sides.
You get both sides, right? It's this beautiful park that has a good view because I donated land.
I'm pretty sure Central Park has a similar story, but I've heard that it's a little bit more grim. I thought there was some controversy surrounding the story of Central Park. Previously, it was a train station that most working class New Yorkers would use to get to different places in the city. And then one rich person was like, I'm tired of the poors just buzzing around the city, so I'm going to buy the station, demolish it, and turn it into a park. I think there's like some story about that.
I'd be curious.
Yeah.
I had always heard that Central Park was specifically built to give people respite from the life of a big city, where they were like,
I think
we need to preserve this land to like
value in
there
the
is.
Central Park. Green spaces have always been a hard thing for cities. I watched a video from another historical sort of researcher. If I can remember her, maybe I'll link her in another episode, talking about green spaces in London, which were not at all a right guaranteed to people for a very long time. In fact, if you had an apartment building across the street from a park, that park would have wrought iron gates that were 10, 12 feet tall.
Yep.
And you had to have a key in order to enter it. So the people who had the apartments would want to use it. And they had to pay like an exorbitant amount for maintenance fees because the poor people were mad that they weren't allowed into the parks. So they would just lug their trash over the fence.
Wow.
And just be like, well, if they get to have their own green, because living in like Mary Shelley's time or a little bit right after, you could go your entire life, if you were a Londoner working a working class job, you could go your entire life not being in more than 4 square feet of grass.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until World War II, when they had a steel issue, that those fences began to be processed into artillery and helmets and different machinery. And when World War II or World War I was ended, there were protests saying, do not put those fences back up. And then those ended up becoming public property.
I want to say that was World War I. That sounds familiar, but I also think that there was, no, I know this is actually true. There was a thing after World War I where the British government, and I think more specifically the English government, said that they wanted to build a nation for heroes. So they specifically started to invest in green spaces where people could go and have a nice time and have a picnic and enjoy some lovely scenery and a lovely garden kind of a thing.
And that was part of the movement, was buying back those that land from, you know, the owners of the apartment complexes that previously owned it, and now that it's a public resource that anybody can go to.
Yeah.
And they had a significant drop in littering once people were actually allowed to sit in the place themselves.
Makes sense. They want to keep their own place nice.
Yeah. Which I thought was
I
interesting.
know
part of
that
history.
happened at the end of World War I. So yeah, I don't know if it was the wrought iron thing, because that does make sense for World War II. And I'd be curious. I want to do some homework on that. But anyway, super cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, next up, what do we got here? Oh, yes. Also in episode 4 of Tesla, Akiva, you came across a children's activist named Mary Mapes Dodge. And you were kind of wondering if she had any relation to Mabel Dodge Luhan. Now, I did quite a bit of digging.
It was hard, right?
I don't know if you've discovered Find a Grave.
No.
Check it out. There's a website called Find a Grave, and they do this amazing thing where they'll show tons and tons of people where they were buried, but more specifically, it shows you their entire family tree, and you can just click and click and click and click, and you go to their uncle, and then look at their uncle's
It's basically
spouse,
ancestry, except it's not your ancestors.
it's just historical ancestry, basically, and it's amazing. So I seriously spent like an hour digging through these.
Because they're in very similar social circles, so.
Yes. Okay. And from everything that I looked at, I could find no correlation between Mary Mapes Dodge and Edwin Dodge. That's who I was looking for.
I was willing to bet on it.
I even looked for Edwin Dodge's dad, because I was able to find Edwin Dodge on the Find a Grave.
It's got to be a cousin
site.
or something.
Okay. I think it's one of those situations where it's like the Roosevelts, right?
Yeah.
Teddy Roosevelt is like the 9th cousin of FDR or something like that. And it's like, if you really dug through it, you could probably find a very distant connection. That's possible because it was around New England and around that area. And Edwin Dodge was from New York, if I'm not mistaken. And so it is possible that somewhere there's this deep, distant connection that goes back where they were 10th cousins or something.
I really wanted to find a connection between Lewin and Tesla. I know that there is one.
But I dug and I found zero. Literally nothing. So if anybody else is better at that type of research and they're like, hang on a second, let me look or whatever, and you can find it, let us know. But so again, we'd be looking for a connection between Mary Mapes Dodge and a man named Edwin Dodge, who was the second husband of Mabel Dodge Luhan. So anyhow, I was very disappointed by that as well. I was really hoping for there to be, yeah, like a kind of connection.
Did Mabel Dodge ever meet Mark Twain? No, different time period.
No. Well, I mean, okay, so no. I mean, Mabel Dodge was born in like 1876.
It's going to be like a 4 degrees of Kevin Bacon
something
situation.
like that. And I mean, Mabel knew everybody. So, and she was in New York throughout the 19-teens, right? Mm-hmm. That was when she had like her salon in New York, and she was organizing all these artists, and she knew Gertrude Stein. I'd be willing to bet that Gertrude Stein had some type of connection to Tesla, which means that she knew Mabel as well. So I'm like,
sure if I gave a letter
we could probably
to Tesla
find.
and be like, hey, could you deliver this to, Dodge Lewin? I bet you he could find somebody who knew her at some point. And
I mean, I'm fairly confident that he was staying at the Waldorf Astoria when she was living in New York. And she was undoubtedly she was going to the Waldorf Astoria. She was almost undoubtedly going to the same restaurants that Tesla was going to.
Yeah, because there's only like 4 fine dining establishments in New York that really like people, like we were talking about Delmonico's. That was the first, at least according to Delmonico's own history, one of the first French cuisine fine dining restaurants in America.
So I would be, man,
historically.
I'd be shocked if there wasn't a night that Mabel was out to dinner and somebody said, oh, that is Nikola Tesla over there. And she was, ooh, or whatever, right?
And he's there like arranging a duck.
Exactly. Like
the legs have to be 4 centimeters apart.
I really, that is not at all outside the realm of possibility. Yeah. But again, there was just nothing that I could find. Right? Okay. So just wanted to throw that out there. I was disappointed too. I was hoping to find something.
I appreciate you, giving it a good try there.
I mean, it's we've literally had some of our listeners say where they feel like Mabel Dodge needs to be a drinking game because all this stuff keeps coming back to her. You know,
we got to make like a little like ofrenda for her or something.
Yeah,
as like the patron of 1800s artists or something.
Which, not to give too many spoilers or whatever, we announced on the last episode that I'm doing Pancho Villa as the next series. I did not realize. So for any of our very long time listeners, you're going to know there was a point where Mabel was involved with a journalist named John Reed, who wrote for Metropolitan Magazine before it turned into a sex gossip magazine. It was actually respectable at a point in time. John Reed was dispatched to, or not even dispatched, he wanted to go and basically report on the Mexican Revolution as it was playing out. Now, what I did not realize is that John Reed is now considered one of the foremost reasons that we know as much as we do, not only about the Mexican Revolution, but about Pancho Villa himself.
Interesting.
And when he went down there, Mabel went with him. So it's pretty insane going through this whole research process.
Has interacted with Pancho Villa, most likely?
No, because when she got to El Paso, which is on the border, on the other side of the river is Juarez, she basically, like, I don't even know if it was like John was like, you're not coming. Like, literally, they are shooting each other. I am going to be on the front lines of battles and wars. I cannot have you with
Dodge
me.
is such a ditz sometimes, which really, I love her for that.
Yeah.
Because he's like, I want to go to war. And they're like, people are literally shooting each other right now. She's like, I don't care. It sounds fun.
Yeah. But he was like, you need to stay in Juarez and I can at least come back to you and say hey or whatever. And I think she only made it a couple weeks where she was like, dude, I'm going back to New York. I'm not going to sit around here and wait for you, basically. But John Reed was very passionate about revolutions and, you know, fighting for the people, and constantly in all of my research is referenced as a point of like, well, the journalist John Reed said this about Pancho Villa, and he actually quoted him as saying this. It's this constant thing of John Reed being this really big name. So it was just super cool. And if anybody listened to the full Mabel series, there was a point where I recited one of John Reed's poems because he was a poet before he was a journalist. So there's just, it's so neat.
It's all connected.
It was just so cool to find out all this information. But anyhow, next up here, this was also in episode 4 of Tesla here. So we had a pretty good laugh about a guy named Robert Underwood Johnson.
I was thinking the same thing.
But
Yep.
we stupidly were like, isn't Dick short for Robert?
It's
no,
Richard.
It's Richard.
I knew it. I had that written down in my notebook.
It was even when I listened, when I was editing the episode, I was like, what was I thinking? No, it's Richard. Like,
it doesn't matter.
I know this, it doesn't matter. It was still very funny, but I think every one of our listeners was like, dude, you idiots. What are you talking about?
We
Dick
just wanted to name him Dick Johnson. That's all we
did.
That's all we cared about.
We did. So I'm glad you caught that one later on as well.
I listened to that and I literally in the car smacked myself with my own forehead being like, it's Richard.
It is Richard. So anyway,
his Bob Johnson, which is not as fun.
It's not as fun, but hey, it was still a good laugh, and I'm going to stand by it.
I'm going to stand by it. He is Dick Johnson. Dick Johnson and Jackass.
Okay, this last one that I have here is my favorite one. Okay. So this was in episode 5 of Tesla, and we talked about how Tesla lived in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. Now, I made a few claims about foods that were potentially invented at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel.
Yes.
With the first being the Waldorf salad. Okay. The Waldorf salad was indeed invented at the hotel. That was in 1896, and it was first served at a charity ball. So the Waldorf
I've never
salad.
had a Waldorf salad.
You're not missing out. It's good, but it's weird. If you look up what it actually is, it's like fruit and nuts and like it's not bad, but it's very like once you see it, you're like, oh yeah, that is very like Victorian bougie.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
But yeah, it was invented there, and it was specifically for like a charity ball. It was where it was first served, and people were like, what is this? And they were like, well, we're just gonna call it the Waldorf salad.
It's the same story. Max Miller from Tasting History, who might possibly be a listener. So if you're listening, hey Max.
Hey Max.
He did a series or an episode on the Caesar salad.
Yeah.
And
Mexico.
What I love about the Caesar salad story is it is apparently exemplary of all of like the food but named by somebody stories, which is the chef didn't realize it was going to be popular and it was generally made out of something out of necessity, and then a line cook made it, but then once it got popular the chef was like, I made it, which is the same story with the Caesar salad, where it's like a line cook was like, hey, all we have is like this romaine and we got like a couple of these and a couple of that, and he's like,
anchovies and mayo, and we'll put it into a mortar and pestle and we'll grind it up and make us dressing. That'll be good, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
And then he was like, well, we have to make it sound fancy, so he started serving the Caesar salads table side. It was like originally a fancy thing to get because he's like, I'm going to assemble it fresh for you table side. When
my favorite is it was made by a Mexican guy, and they're like, no, it's Italian. I'm like,
no, it's literally not. His name was Cesar, not Caesar.
Exactly.
and he would just like cook it, assemble it tableside in order to like just like convince the customers that it was a fancy thing, when in reality he was just trying to upsell whatever he had left in stock.
Dude,
and then he claimed it as
favorite things.
Yeah, and then he claimed it as his own recipe when the line cook was like, okay, really?
That's fine.
Really?
I didn't know that component about it was the line cook.
And apparently Max talks about this a lot. That is the case for so many other foods that have like a name associated with them.
I'm sure. Well, I mean, okay. I will say that sometimes that is fair though, because so there's a really good example of a very famous chef who owns the 3 Michelin star restaurant in Chicago called Alinea. The chef is named Grant Ox. Okay. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce his last name. So there was a point where he was working at one of the most famous restaurants in the world in California called the French Laundry.
Yeah.
And oh gosh, the chef's name is escaping me right now, but he's extraordinarily famous and beloved, right? And there's this story how when Grant went and worked there, he the chef said, well, why don't you try making me something? And he said, oh, okay. And he got like pureed melon and then covered it in caviar and then had this like sauce that he made that he put on top of it. And he took a bite of it and the chef went, this is really good. But that when I serve this, it's going to be mine. And Grant said very like cockily, he was like, plenty more of that came from. And like, that was a way it went. And now it's one of the signature dishes of the French Laundry, but it was made by this other guy, Grant Ox. And did you look up the name of the chef?
Thomas Keller.
Thomas Keller. Oh gosh.
He was in The Bear, wasn't he?
He might've been.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he had a little cameo in The Bear.
But yeah, Thomas Keller is one of the most beloved chefs in the world, and by all accounts is a very, very decent guy too. Very, very cool and good to work for. But anyways, it's one of those examples, right, where it's like, I don't think Thomas Keller is sitting around being like, no, that's my recipe, but him being like, but it is a French Laundry recipe. Like, that is, you came into my kitchen with my ingredients, you made this thing under my watch, and I said this was good and decided to serve it. So like, it is ours. It's
Yeah, it's the same thing why a lot of American knife makers don't do the Japanese approach, because Japanese bladesmiths can work literally 20 years making their own, maybe even their own designs, geometries, whatever. And they'll be like, well, this is a kikuichi knife. Like, kikuichi is a great example. The company's been around for 600 years, and almost all of the knives that they make are made out from subsidiary companies. Like Inami-san's knife, which is hanging up right there. It was made in a shop in Osaka, even though it's a kikuichi knife, and kikuichi is in Nara. Like, it's the same thing where it's like, this is no longer your object. It's under the front of, the French Laundry, right?
Right. And also, really quickly, I'll add another fun example of the Caesar salad, right, is nachos. There was it was in like the 50s, I want to say. There was a chef who, had these regulars, and the regulars said, make us something new. And he was like, all right, grabbed some tortilla chips and shredded some cheese and melted it and was like, there you go. And the chef's name was Nacho. That was his nickname.
Oh, that's cool.
So they called them nachos. Oh,
that's
cute. Give us some nachos or whatever.
I think Nacho is one of the coolest little nicknames. Like my buddy, like Nacho is such like it makes you want to like pinch their cheeks. You know what I'm saying?
You have to be Hispanic though.
Yeah, of course.
Like, if you're a white guy called Nacho, you're like, what's wrong?
I don't trust you. Like, stay away.
Okay, so the whole Waldorf salad thing, to continue on with that, okay? Now, next up, I thought that oysters Rockefeller were invented there, but that was not at all invented at the hotel, but rather that was down in New Orleans in 1889. Apparently, it was named because it felt extravagant. That was and they were like, it feels rich, so we're going to call it Oysters Rockefeller after John D. Rockefeller, but he had no part of it. It was
no association.
Yeah, it was completely invented down there. Now, last up, this is my favorite one. Eggs Benedict. Okay. Now, this is a little bit more tricky because there's some mixed kinds of stories here.
I hope Max is listening. I want to see what he has to say about this one.
But you're going to like this one. Okay. This one, I was like, no shit. This is so cool. Okay. It is commonly believed that in 1894, a man named Lemuel Benedict was hungover, went for breakfast at the Waldorf Astoria, ordered, quote, buttered toast, poached eggs, crisp bacon, and a hooker of hollandaise. Okay. Which is just like a dollop, right?
Yeah.
A hooker of hollandaise. And that the hotel was so impressed with the dish that he made up that they named it Eggs Benedict after him.
Gotcha.
Okay. However, you will be delighted to know, Akiva, that none other than Tesla's favorite restaurant, Delmonico's, claimed that they invented the dish as early as 1860, which is a claim they still make to this day, and it even says so on their menu. Pretty darn cool.
That's cool.
Okay. And then just as a few other kind of fun little items here, another couple items that were actually invented at the Waldorf Astoria or originated there. One is red velvet cake.
Yeah,
Pretty
I love
cool.
red. I know that it's just the red dye, and I'm imagining it in my head, but it tastes different.
No. It came from, so originally it was raw cocoa powder. That's where it came from. It actually did have a red tint to it.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Interesting.
And then later on, as cocoa powder got more refined and processed, it became darker and roasted more deeply. But initially, that was why it was called red velvet cake, because it had a reddish color to it because of the cocoa powder that was used inside of it. So weird random things.
Red velvet is actually still one of my favorite.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I'm not much of a cake guy, but if you give me red velvet, I'll eat it.
My sister makes these red velvet cupcakes that I could demolish like all day long. They are so good. Next up, though, this is like my hat goes off to Waldorf Astoria because my life is forever changed as a result of this. Thousand Island dressing
Really?
was invented at the Waldorf Astoria.
Every restaurant's special sauce came from the. Which, by the way, could we stop calling it special sauce? It's Thousand Island.
It is Thousand Island.
Every single my fry
and there's
sauce.
variations of it, whatever.
It's
But
just
it is
more
Thousand
pickle
Islands.
juice or less pickle juice.
Or I add onions to mine and I add a dash of smoked paprika or whatever. It's like I don't care.
Yeah,
it's
shut
all
up.
the same.
It's Thousand Island.
And it's what makes In-N-Out delicious, right?
Yeah.
It's their sauce. It's their spread. And so that
Why
came
do they call
from,
it Thousand Island?
I don't know. That I'd be curious about. But next up, though, this one is pretty darn cool. The martini
Oh, really?
was invented at the Waldorf Astoria. And I think I had read somewhere that it had something to do with a customer that had ordered it, and his name was Martin. And they were like, well, we're going to call it the martini then. Right? So, or like Martine. Anyways.
Really?
So that was why it was called the martini. It was because of this person who said, oh, make it like this, vermouth with vodka, shake it up, add a olive or whatever. And that's what the cocktail became. And then lastly here, this one I thought was crazy. Okay. Chop suey. And the reason that it was invented was because they were hosting
No
a
way.
Chinese ambassador, and they were like,
They wanted him to wake up, grab a brush, and put a little makeup.
they basically were just like, we want to make a dish that would make them feel at home. So they invented chop suey and served it to this Chinese ambassador.
I wonder. I'm curious as to what he thought about that.
I know. I mean, hey, look, it's good. So like, I would assume.
Okay, so apparently the Thousand Islands dressing is referring to the Thousand Islands region, which is a group of islands located on the St. Lawrence River between the United States and Canada.
Interesting.
Where the dressing is believed to have been originated, which now we have some conflicting information. Whatever. I'm going to call it the Waldorf because
it is possible that it was just popularized at the Waldorf Astoria. But from what I had read initially on the Waldorf Astoria, I think it was just even their Wikipedia page, that was one of the items that was listed as being invented there. So
interesting.
Anyway, I thought that one was just super cool. And I loved the little tie-in to Delmonico's because it was like, he went to both of those places.
One of these days when we just completely skyrocket into the charts, we are going to go to Delmonico's.
Hell yeah, dude.
And we're going to order Tesla's orders. And it would just be the coolest. Also, so many other people that we're going to continue to cover have eaten at Delmonico's.
Oh, yeah.
So
anyway, just thought those were especially that last one. I love food history in general and seeing where that stuff comes from, but just kind of learning, those weird little funny stories. And I weirdly, I think I was the most surprised to discover the martini was invented there. Such a universal drink or whatever. But there you go.
Yeah. Another great channel to look at as far as food history goes. I mean, we have tasting history. They also have a sub channel called drinking history, but also how to drink. I'm not sure if you've ever heard.
I've heard of it. I've never watched it.
I've been watching him for years, and he goes over the history of cocktails, and he has all sorts of incredible reference books, and it completely changes how I envisioned drinking in the Wild West.
Interesting.
Drinking a beer was not a cowboy thing to do for a very long time, and they would have cocktails, and a lot of the times those cocktails were fairly sophisticated with their own herb gardens attached to the saloons and bars, with 4 or 5 ingredient drinks. You know, you have to remember a lot of the time in the cowboy era was also a result of gold mining industries.
Oh, yeah.
So coming up with fancy things for people to spend their money on the second that they got it was the way you made money in the Wild West. So fancy drinks and lobster and you know, stuff like that was a huge selling point. So a lot of the saloons where, you know, the old cowboy would come in, he would likely be drinking an old fashioned, or, you know, his bartender would be frothing up egg whites into his drink.
So
as opposed to just, you know, throwing back a beer.
I seriously, now I have this idea in my head of if we ever need like a 2-week break between our actual biographies, I really am thinking that I want to do like a little 2-part mini series that's just called like Deconstructing the Cowboy. Okay. Because the more that you learn about historical cowboys, the more that you just go, this is a lie. All of these ideas that we have about cowboys, like how people from Texas are like, well, no, I'm a cowboy, so I wear my big old hat and I wear my blah, 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 blah. It's like, all of that is a lie, right?
And you're probably learning a lot of this with Pancho Villa, right?
Dude, so one of the greatest ironies is that like a lot of these stereotypes that we think of about the like the good old American cowboy, it is the good old Mexican cowboy.
Buckaroo is just vaquero
yep.
in Spanish.
That was literally, they talked about that in one of my Pancho books.
I mean, it's something that my mom used to teach in a lot in her Spanish classes when I was still, you know, when I was in high school. I took my mom's Spanish classes, and she would, you know, show videos and stuff about that story. And like as a Latino, especially if you're like 4th or 5th generation Mexican, a lot of these people just kind of like know this, but it just is not like the romantic West the way that, you know, we imagine it with John Wayne and all of those guys. Like it's a completely different story, and I'm very, very excited for Pancho Villa because I'm sure you have more information on it than even I do.
I mean, we're not going to get into like that side of it necessarily a whole lot,
but there are so many preconceptions. Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, so like one of my favorite examples about that whole cowboy thing is holsters, like hip holsters almost did not exist throughout the Wild West.
Okay? How were the guns carried?
In their pockets. Literally, they had gun pockets in their coats. Okay. And one of the reasons that, for example, Wyatt Earp was such a legendary gunslinger was because he would specifically have any coat that he had, either that he would buy or tailored, he would have the inside of his gun pocket lined with canvas, so that the gun would slide in and out really fast and really easily. Where a lot of the other guys would go to pull the gun out of their pocket and it would get stuck on the fabric. Like the hammer would get stuck or something like that. Oops, and they'd fumble and they'd pull it out and then they'd shoot. So like the whole gunfight at the OK Corral, not a single one of them was wearing a gun holster. Not a one.
Yeah.
Every single one of them had their gun in their pocket. And then even funnier, the gunfight at the OK Corral, every time you see it in a movie, it's this like epic, like running between buildings, blah, 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 blah. We have actually discovered that the true to form area where the fight commenced was in a space that they estimate was about 15 feet by about 19 feet.
Huh.
Like tiny.
Interesting. Like a room.
Like a room. They basically showed up in this area, shot each other, the end.
That's so lame.
Right? Or even funnier, something like 95% of hats worn by people in the Old West, bowlers. Bowler caps. They didn't wear cowboy caps. They didn't wear wide brims because if you think about it for 4 seconds, ride a horse at full speed wearing one of those hats, that sucker is gone in a second.
It is true. I've always been curious about that.
It doesn't make any sense to wear a hat like that if you're trying to ride a horse around or whatever. So they wear bowler caps to keep the sun off their head, a little bit of shade on their eyes, easy to maintain, small, like...
That's so sad.
So like Billy the Kid, if you ever look at pictures of Billy the Kid, he's always wearing a bowler cap.
Interesting.
That is... So anyways, there's all these funny things about cowboys that people have in their heads, and it's like, this is all John Wayne nonsense. Like, it's not real. It's not how it actually was.
Yeah.
If you think about cowboy boots, really? Come on.
Also, it wasn't... it's the same thing with like cowboys and Indians. a cowboy is a guy who maintains cows. What is he doing? Fighting Native Americans. I think Adam Ruins Everything talks about this. He was like, the game should be called Government and Indians, because that's really where like the conflict generally came from.
Yes.
Was just governments encroaching on like native territories and whatnot. It wasn't people who were rustling cattle, just like out going on these clandestine missions to, kill some dude. Like it's there's so many preconceptions, and yeah, I think people would do well to know a little bit of the history surrounding the Old West.
I think cosplay is cool too, but just admit what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's my thing with the whole like cowboy image of like, nah, I'm a cowboy. This is what I wear. It's like, I don't want to burst your bubble because I'm not trying to be mean to anybody here, but like that is a completely Hollywoodized fabrication of what you think
happened.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyways.
Interesting. Yeah, that would be a really fun episode to do. I would we could just like join in and do some research together on just all of the
breaking
stuff
apart
the
cowboy or whatever in the Old West and stuff. Yeah. And I mean, even what spurred it on was being like, oh yeah, these cowboys weren't sitting around drinking beers and shots of whiskey. They were like, no, give me a froofy cocktail. Like,
literally.
That's awesome to me. You know what I mean? That it's like, these weren't just these degenerates. They actually had taste. They wanted to sit down and have a nice drink.
They only had the crappy food when supplies were low. But like, if you could get a shipment out from the East Coast or the West Coast, these guys were eating oysters and lobster. In fact, the whole phrase, there's no such thing as free lunch. You know where that comes from?
No.
So in the Old West, when gold mining, like I said, was a boom, just like I was saying earlier, the way that people made their money, if they weren't mining gold, was to find an expensive thing and try to get these gold miners to spend it on it, because generally these people had no money or they had tons of money. So casinos or bars would have a free buffet. You could go in and eat free food. And it's not just plain food. It would be like lobster and oysters on the shell, like over ice, like delicious stuff, because the drinks were wildly expensive. And you only had to buy one drink, which would make it all worth it.
Sure.
But no gold miner after a full day of panning gold out in the California sun ever bought one drink. So that's where the phrase "there's no such thing as free lunch" comes from, as far as I understand.
It makes me think of Rockies games here in Denver, where people are like, dude,
it's like going to the casino and being like, yeah, I'm just going to go for the buffet. No one ever goes for the buffet.
Well, I think of the Rockies games, people go like, oh, dude, I love Rockies games because it's like, it's a great time. It's so cheap.
No.
It's cheap to get in.
It's cheap to get in.
And then
pretzels,
your beers are $9, $10. You want to get a burger? Oh, that's $25. Like, you're spending $50 plus every time that you go, in addition to your $9 ticket. You know, so. Anyways, I just think that's funny.
Yeah. There's a whole other video. I can't remember. I don't think it was Tasting History talked about it. Maybe it was. Where they talked about the idea of the free lunch.
Yeah.
And that was it. It was a ploy to get people to spend a bunch of money because the guys were hungry. And once you're hungry, the foods were extremely salty a lot of the time. So you'd want something to wash that down with, right? And why not try these new cocktails that are coming out from the Waldorf Astoria in the 1800s?
Yeah.
Because making mixed drinks was an art at that point. They would have books. These bartenders would read these books and learn how to, like I said, grow their own herbs to make them. So why not just wash it down with some roofie? It'd be like going to Starbucks and knowing that you get a free grilled cheese sandwich. But why don't you try this like iced oat milk chai latte with cold foam?
It's only $12.
It's only $12. And it's the same thing.
It reminds me a lot of, and this is true, why they serve nuts at bars a lot of times, where you're going to munch on some nuts. It's like, okay, it's costing the bar. This is literally, they did the math on it. We're like, okay, it's going to cost us like $100 a week to supply everybody with all of these salty like peanuts or whatever, right? And then they're going to sit there and munch on them, and it's going to make them thirsty, and they're going to buy 4 beers rather than 2 because they're thirsty eating the free nuts that we give them. Yeah. So we're actually profiting off of this entire situation. So it's not free. You're actually spending more because you're having them.
And I want to say that's where it came down to, because eventually people got wise and would just come in for the lunch and try to buy the one drink. And then
I'll just have a water.
Yes, exactly. And that's when things started to lose their profit. So then the buffets became less and less extravagant.
Yeah.
And then eventually I think that's where you just get to like the salted nuts or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I think we've probably hit time, and we might even have to cut a little bit of this out because we've been chatting for so long.
I know.
So we'll,
It was a good chat, though.
Yeah, we'll end it there, everybody. But thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed our random banter and corrections that we had. We'll see you back here in a couple weeks for the start of Pancho Villa, which I'm very excited about. I think it's going to be a good time. I've been working pretty hard on it and trying to read a bunch of different stuff and sources and try to figure out what. Essentially, I've been finding with Pancho, there's a lot of stuff that we kind of go like, well, we think.
Yeah.
Right. So like I've been trying to get to the heart of like what is real and what's not, because there's a lot of people that told tall tales, and there's this sort of common theme of like the amount of stories that came out about Pancho Villa was like, okay, then it means that he was in 10 places at once.
Yes.
So,
very polarizing character.
Right. So what actually happened,
more than a person.
Literally, like there's folk hero stuff that's involved too. But even that, there's a lot of conflicting information on too, where people are like, no, he was great. No, he was terrible. So there's this really interesting sort of thing, but I think it's going to be a good time, and I think y'all are going to enjoy it. It's
I'm excited.
It's rootin' tootin' good time, and it's a lot of like feels very Game of Thronesy sort of political
like
movement.
Faction war.
Yeah, dude.
Yes.
Like it's like, oh, so this person's in power, so then these people were in power over here, and then in order for them to do that, they had to do this. But then once that happened, this person decided this was no longer a good thing, which made these people mad, so they decided like it's that type of stuff.
I've got something for you. And so my childhood hero as a kid was Zorro.
Sure.
Is there anything associated with Zorro and Pancho Villa? Because I know it's like same time period. Is there any factual basis around Zorro or anything like that?
Okay, so Zorro, his actual timeline was more during the fight for Mexican independence.
Wait, was he real?
No.
Okay.
He was a folk hero, folk legend, like Paul Bunyan,
Mm-hmm.
right? So not real, but he kind of came about as this idea, and his timeline was probably about 40 years before Pancho Villa. So
Gotcha.
I want to say that it was something like 1816, I want to say, was when the Mexican War of Independence started to free themselves from the Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a leader of Mexico for a long time named Santa Anna, who you've heard if you ever like watched Zorro anything. There's always like Santa Anna, he's dispatched these people, and we got to make sure that blah, 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 blah. So that was before the Mexican Revolution.
Gotcha.
There was this sort of period that happened between about 1816 all the way up to about 1910, where Mexico went through. It got its independence from Spain, but then there was a point that the French tried to come over and take over, and then Mexico was like, no, we're good, and then we're going to self-govern, and then this guy rigs an election, and then another guy comes into power, becomes a dictator. Like, it's this whole thing.
Dude.
And that's what leads up to the Mexican Revolution.
Can I just say, I am giddy right now. And the reason why is I am entirely out of my depth with this history. I have never even taken an interest in the Mexican Revolution. Like I said, I knew the basics, like large parts of America were Mexico, the reason why like a lot of the names that we have here in the United States are in Spanish is because, Mexican or at least Latino people lived here first.
Yeah.
But that's as far as really my history goes. And the fact that you've already like started talking about, the different dates and names, I am so sold on this next episode.
I'll be honest, I didn't know it either. And I always try to find those types of things where I don't necessarily want to gravitate towards somebody that I feel like I know a lot about. I want to go towards somebody that I go like, what am I going to uncover here? Like, what's the actual big story?
That's how I felt with Mary Shelley too.
Yeah.
Like in what world would you have pictured this one horror writer, their mom was like a radical feminist, the dad was a literal anarchist, like she was hanging out with all these crazy people, and I love getting completely out of my depth and then just like learning to tread water in a new area of history, and I'm very excited for Pancho Villa for that very reason.
And there's going to be a lot of that stuff, and I can make no claims that I'm now some authority on it, but I have done, a fair amount of research, even in the sort of period of Mexican independence, to where I can at least speak to it, right?
Yeah.
Now, we kind of said this one of the last episodes too, to where listeners, as we go through the series on Pancho Villa, if you go, hey, no, hey, that's actually not quite correct, please do let us know.
Yeah.
Because again, this is not necessarily, and it's a very complicated situation that all went down. There's a lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous. And that's from the Big Lebowski, by the way. So yes, that's really just to say, keep us honest. If there's something that we get into that you go, that's just not really true to what happened, I'm open to it, right?
Yes.
Let us know.
That's why we have this episode that we're doing right now. That's why we have the office hours.
Exactly.
Because there's no way that we're going to be 100% right about all sorts of stuff. So even if it's like an old season, especially if it's the most recent season, just throw it out there.
Totally.
And we talked about this in the last time. I am Hispanic, but I am not Mexican,
right.
and Daniel is not Mexican.
Right.
So we're covering a different culture, a different country, and a different political climate.
Right.
Which is another reason that if you feel like you have some information to share, please do it, because we want to share this story in the most honest, heartfelt, best intentioned way.
Absolutely. And what I will say at the very least, and we'll talk about this throughout the entire series of Pancho Villa, it's a really cool story of how, just the tale as old as time in a lot of ways of the people are being oppressed. They're not having their voices heard. They hear some rallying cries, and the next thing you know, there's a revolution going on. And so much of it is about just trying to get human rights for the people of Mexico, trying to get things like education. Literally, they one of these people, we'll talk about it more, he took away public education completely from the people of Mexico. And a lot of it was them going like, well, okay, if you're not going to educate us, then we can't get the jobs that we think we should be having, and that's not fair. So you're literally forcing our hand into being grunt workers. You're inherently tipping the system against us. So change this. And when the government said, nah, we're good, they were like, all right, we're going to kill some people. Like, that's basically kind of like what happened. And more or less that in many ways kind of happened in the American Revolution too, right? Yeah. So we'll draw the parallels as we go along, and it'll be a good time. And I hope y'all are interested as well, because I don't know. It's for me, I grew up around a lot of Mexican people, but I didn't really know a lot about the history of Mexico. Yeah, and it's very, very interesting
right
stuff.
Now we're living in a place called Colorado, like, and like, say what you will. I know, like, and not to dig on like national pride in any way, because I certainly am proud of the country that, I grew up in, but you do have to give credit where credit's due. There are so many different places and cultures and situations that we find ourselves in here in America that are the direct result of Mexican people and the Mexican culture, right? So this is going to be great for that.
I agree. And I think it's going to be
not to
hopefully
make anything
illuminating.
Too long.
Yeah, no.
I know we're schmoozing, but
no, but it'll be really fun, and it's fascinating stuff and really good history. And Pancho is a crazy, interesting guy too. So yeah, we'll get into all of that, and I think it's gonna be a good time. I think y'all are gonna enjoy it. So with that, we'll say farewell for now, and we'll see you back in a couple weeks here for Pancho Villa. And I guess we'll do our regular sign off. Or again, before we do that, for anybody that wants to support us, again, go to our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/thebiographers. You can find us on social media, TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, generally going to be at The Biographers. And then, like always, go check out Akiva's website. That's going to be Metalwork by Meola, MEOLA.com. And you can use the code Biographers at checkout to get 10% off of your order. I think that'll do it, yeah?
Yeah, I think so. For anybody who's interested in Metalwork by Meola stuff, I'm now officially taking commissions again. The shop is not 100% set up, but still ready to do some work. So Sweet. If there's some stuff that you've been waiting on, please don't hesitate to send an email, and most especially just sign up for the newsletter. Yeah. Because once things are actually running and going, then I will be, sending out information to people.
Sweet. So. Sounds good. All right, well, we'll see y'all next time, and do remember, as always, ignorance is not stupidity, it is the absence of knowledge, and I do hope you learned maybe something today.
See ya.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.